What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the heaviest show in the universe. On today's episode, we are reviewing Megadeth's brand new album, The Sick, The Dying, The Dead. Now, as you can tell, the background's a little different than it usually is. I am on a delayed connecting flight from Toronto to Atlanta to go to my cousin's wedding this weekend, but the album leaked early today, and I was listening to it through my whole flight to Toronto from Vancouver, and I could not wait to talk about it and get it out to you guys on time. Anyway, so if the quality is a little bit less than you're used to around here, that's why. Thank you so much for watching. Anyway, appreciate the support to all of you who always continue to support me, and let's get on with the review because this album does not disappoint. I don't need to go into the story of Megadeth. We all know Megadeth. We all know Dave. We all know the legendary feats that he has accomplished throughout his career. And of course, we all know that Rust in Peace is likely the greatest metal album ever made. And if it's not Rust in Peace, it's probably Countdown to Extinction or Peace Sells. It's one of those three. It's got to be one of those three. It's just the way it is. But right off the bat, I want to say that they did a great job mixing Dave's voice on this album. The guy just overcame throat cancer, and he's now out there singing and performing, and he sounded great on this album. But I have no doubt that the mixing and the producing was a huge part of that, and they did a fantastic job because his voice fits so well in the mix, and he sounds fantastic. This is some of the best sounding vocals, in my opinion, that he has ever performed on album. And starting off with the first track, the title track, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, what a badass name. It was so awesome. Automatically, they didn't waste any time blasting you in the face with a fantastic classic thrash riff that only Megadeth could really get you. The main phrase of this song is so sick, and the way they tie it in to every solo littered throughout. There must have been 2 or 3 solos throughout the song, and the main riff and the rest of the phrasing in there tied in so well with all of those. It didn't feel out of place. It didn't feel forced. It felt flawless. It felt like it was flowing. It felt like they really had control of it. This is Kiko's second album with Megadeth, and listening to this album, I had no doubt in my mind that he must have been easily the second best guitarist in Megadeth's history, behind, of course, Marty Friedman. And we'll get into why he's not better than Marty Friedman in terms of the way he writes his music and his solos in a little bit here. But also for the first time on this album is Dick Verban, and he does a great job on this album. Now, last week or a couple weeks ago, I reviewed Afterlife by Five Finger Death Punch, and I said that the drumming on that album felt so empty. It felt so dead. It felt like it was just the guy coming in to do his job and then leave and say good enough. And that is the complete opposite on this album, man. Dirk did a fantastic job. His drum fills are on point. They fill every single hole that they're supposed to with rhythm, with nuance, with a lot of passion. Something that wasn't so present on some of the albums that I've listened to lately. He truly is a legend, and I think he cements his legacy with this album with Megadeth because he fits in perfect. Not only was he able to keep rhythm with Dave and Kiko, but he was also able to step into his own and have his own piece of the music present throughout the album. It wasn't like he was a secondary character in the play of Megadeth and this album. He was a main character here, and he represented himself very well. The next thing I really want to talk about is the fact that this is easily Megadeth's heaviest album ever. Hands down, this is the heaviest Megadeth album they've ever written. Dave said in previous interviews regarding this album that was going to be the case, that this was going to be a heavy Megadeth album. He even said that there was going to be blast beats. Now, unfortunately, there's no blast beats in here. There really isn't, but they get close. But speaking of blast beats, that brings me to another point here, and that's there's a lot of death metal style riffs on this album. Riffs that you would hear on an album like Tomb of the Mutilated or Leprosy. It was really refreshing to hear Dave writing those kind of riffs as opposed to just trying to keep it super fast and super thrashy the whole time, because he's very talented at writing all sorts of different types of riffs. But trying to go down that heavier path is not something that he's really tried to do. Like, Megadeth's not a soft band, they're definitely a heavy band, but he really is taking it to the next level here, and I think that it's really refreshing to hear him try to do that. And he does it without ignoring the roots of the way he writes and the roots of his music, because a lot of songs on this album remind me of classic Megadeth albums, namely Countdown to Extinction. There were even a few different songs on here that really reminded me of So Far So Good So What. There's a ton of groove on this album, to the likes of which I haven't heard from them since I listened to Countdown to Extinction. That album was very groovy, very well written. A lot of stadium sounding music on there, but I wouldn't call this a stadium sounding album. Think if Countdown to Extinction was fused with So Far So Good So What, and you have this album. And going back to the death metal aspect on here, we have Steve DiGiorio stepping in for bass for the fired David Ellefson. And when the music stops and you can hear the bass, he does a very good job. He's a master at his craft, and those death albums that he played on are some of my personal favorite, not only death albums, but death metal albums of all time. And we'll get into more of the bass later, but when you can hear it and when the music does break down to give the bass its due, he does a fantastic job. His bass tone is nasty, it is deep, and it gets you grooving and bopping, kind of like Dave Ellefson's bass tone when you listen to Dawn Patrol. There was not a bad song on this album, but I really want to get into the song Dogs of Chernobyl. This is easily not only the best song on this album, but probably the best song that a Big Four band has written in the past 15, 20 years perhaps. It's on the level of songs like Spit Out the Bone. And what I loved about this album is that it really displayed what Megadeth's all about without going too technical, without trying to be too progressive and ruining it. They did a fantastic job of playing to their strengths on this song, starting out a bit slow, adding it a bit faster and going until by the end of the song it's just an absolute show. The dueling solos on here are absolutely fantastic. They're mind-blowing. Kiko and Dave have a chemistry that I don't think Dave's had with anyone since Marty. He and Chris Broderick would do the dueling solos at times, but it was always a bit mechanical because Chris Broderick, he's a bit of a mechanical player. He doesn't have the feeling that Marty does. He doesn't have the feeling that Kiko does, and he definitely doesn't have the jazz background that Chris Poland does. And Dave's lyricism on this album was really well done. Dave can be cringy. Dave can deliver his lyrics in a very cringy way, but on this album, he did a fantastic job, and I thought his lyric writing was really good, especially on the first track, the title track, on Junkie, on Life is Hell, and on Dogs of Chernobyl especially. In fact, these might be the best written and best delivered Megadeth lyrics ever, if not since Countdown and Rust in Peace, that lineup. This album is absolutely fantastic. I could not say more good things about it, and I could talk about all the good things forever and tell you how amazing this is, but it's not the most technical album. It's not the most technical Megadeth album. It's not the most progressive Megadeth album, and that's when I think I'll transition to the not so good about this album. So I felt like the songwriting on here for the most part was very good, but it did follow a pattern that, you know, Megadeth doesn't really do all the time. Maybe on their latest albums, but in the past, the real good Megadeth writing, it never really followed a pattern. On this album, it followed a pattern. You'd have the beginning, and then it would break into a slower kind of middle, and then it would get faster near the end, and that was the case for a vast majority of the songs. It's not the worst thing. It's just kind of basic songwriting, and it's not the worst, it's not the best, and it didn't take away from the album necessarily, but it did hold this album back a little bit. I think if we ever want to see a Rust in Peace level album again from Megadeth, and I think we can based off of this album, I think he still has that in him. But if we want to see that again, he's got to stay away from the conventional songwriting, because albums like Rust in Peace, they weren't conventionally written at all, and that's why we love Megadeth. Also, the bass, as much of a beast and a monster and an absolute menace Steve DiGiorio is on the bass, he wasn't really present in the mix. And I don't know if that's because they had to re-record his stuff after they fired Dave Ellefson and they were in a rush to get it proper and done. But for the most part, you can't really hear the bass unless the rest of the music stops. It's really unfortunate. And as much as I said that the lyrical delivery was on point, there's still some unique cringe Dave moments on here. It wouldn't be a Megadeth album without that kind of stuff. But that's about it for the negatives on this album. Man, adding up each individual score of each individual song and dividing by the number of songs on the album, we come to a final score of 8.9 out of 10. Man, I absolutely love Megadeth. They're my second favorite band of all time. They likely wrote the greatest metal album of all time in Rust in Peace, and they are back with an absolute banger, proving that they're probably the best of the big four right now, and they're blowing a lot of thrash bands out of the water, all those younger thrash bands with this album. They're blowing them out of the water, and it's so nice to hear another return to form following up on the very good, very excellent Dystopia from 2016. Dave's a monster, Dave's a beast. He came back from throat cancer and released a banger album. I can't believe it. That's so sick. And if you like this album, be sure to give me a thumbs up down below. Leave a comment about what you thought of this album. And maybe I missed some stuff. Maybe I missed some positives. Maybe I missed some negatives. I'd love to hear about it down below so I can have a look at them the next time I go through and listen to this awesome album, which I'm pretty sure we will be seeing in my end of the year top albums. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time on the heaviest show in the universe. Long live metal.